Hi, welcome back. Thanks for joining me for another episode in our study of the Sermon on the Mount. In our last episode, we noticed Matthew chapter 5 in verse 20, where Jesus says that unless we exceed the righteousness of the Pharisees, we cannot enter the kingdom of God. Beginning in verse 21 through the rest of chapter 5, Jesus gives examples and instruction as to how we can exceed the righteousness of the Pharisees regarding a number of different situations and interactions with other people. Beginning in verse 21, Jesus starts to properly define murder in God's kingdom. Notice what he says. You have heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not kill, and whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. But I say unto you, that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council. But whosoever shall say, Thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and remember that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave the gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift. Agree with thine adversary quickly while thou art in the way with him, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee to the officer, and thou be cast into prison. Verily I say unto thee, thou shalt by no means come out thence till thou hast paid the uttermost farthing. In introducing each of these scenarios in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says, You have heard it said by them of old. Now, what he's doing by using that expression is dealing with the opinions, the traditions of the elders. He's not quoting specifically from the old law. He's citing how the old law had been misread and misapplied, misinterpreted. Anytime Jesus quotes from the Old Testament or the old law, he will cite a specific passage, or he will say things like, it is written. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus does none of that. Instead, what he's doing is identifying common perceptions of the old law, opinions of the law itself. And he's properly clarifying them in the context of the old law, but also brings us beyond the old law and into the kingdom. He clarifies these misconceptions and then states, here's how your behavior must be if you're going to be part of the kingdom. So here, first of all, Jesus says that you've heard it said that thou shalt not kill. Of course, the old law condemned murder, and the Pharisees among everybody recognized that readily. However, Jesus says murder in the kingdom is not just literally taking someone's life. Murder in the kingdom can be the mere mistreatment of your fellow man. Jesus is concerned with how we treat other people, because how we treat other people is an expression of what is residing deeply within our hearts. The Pharisees could promote themselves as that, yes, they had never murdered anyone, but how did they treat their fellow man? Well, as we considered in earlier episodes, they were unjust, they were oppressive, they were extortioners, they were dishonest, they mistreated their fellow man at every turn in order to gain some advantage over them. Jesus goes on to say, but I say. That's a very important expression. But I say. Here Jesus is commanding. He's not just giving his opinion about something. He's not just showing where the Pharisees have gone wrong, or not just saying, well, here's what Moses intended. He's saying, but I say. Jesus is this possessor of authority, and he is expressing it and how he expects us and his audience to respond to his teaching. Remember, at the conclusion of this sermon, the audience is going to recognize that Jesus possessed real authority, unlike the scribes of his day. So here in this text, Jesus condemns being angry with our brother without a reason. And I know what you're thinking. I've been angry, and there's always a reason for my anger. And that's true. But generally, once cooler heads prevail in a very tense and frustrating situation, we recognize that, well, our anger was not justified. And that's what Jesus is getting at here. Jesus says that we should be very careful. We should be very careful in how we treat other people. He says that we're not to use the word reka. And I don't know about you, but I've never used that word in my language, and you've probably never used it in yours. That's not the point. Jesus is not just talking about a specific word that is to be absent from our vocabulary. The word fool, certainly we're more familiar with. But again, Jesus is not just prohibiting a specific word from being used in our vocabulary. What do those words mean? Reka means worthless. Fool means senseless. Have you ever treated someone as being senseless? Have you ever treated someone as being worth less than yourself? If you've ever been angry with someone without a cause, that's exactly how you have treated them. Jesus is condemning treating each other as worthless and senseless. Remember, we have all been created in the image of God. We represent the very pinnacle of God's creation, and that must shape entirely how we treat each other. If our treatment of others, or rather our treatment of others, is always a reflection of what is in our heart. The Pharisees in their treatment of other people proved that they hated their brother. It proved that they were void of love for their fellow man. Jesus wants us as citizens of his kingdom to be loving in how we treat each other. Well, what do you do if you treat someone as worthless and senseless? Do you just go on living as if nothing's happened? Do you ignore it? Do you try to amend for what is to be done? Well, Jesus here in this passage, he commands us to do what is most difficult. He commands us to do what we often avoid doing at all costs. Jesus demands that we reconcile with our victim. This is deeply, deeply challenging. Often when we've hurt someone, when we realize that our actions, our words have been hurtful and harmful to someone else, we'll try to justify our mistreatment. Maybe we will describe our victim as someone, well, they're just thin-skinned, or well, they're easily offended. We may concede that we've offended someone, but maybe we think that, well, I didn't sin against them. I may have offended them, but I didn't sin against them. If the royal law of love, breaking the royal law of love is not sin, then what is? Of course, if we have offended someone, we have sinned against them. Maybe we justify our mistreatment by saying that, well, we were defending the truth. And as long as we were defending the truth, then how we treat someone, what we say, the words we use, how we come across is irrelevant. Well, no, that's not true. Maybe, like the example that Jesus uses here in Matthew chapter 5, maybe in realizing how we have harmed someone, we think that we can somehow amend for our mistreatment by becoming more devoted to worship. Jesus says, no, if you recognize that you have hurt someone, then you need to stop worship. Reconciliation is more important than worship. He says, no, leave your gift at the altar and then go and be reconciled to your brother and then come back and worship and you'll be received. When we have treated someone as senseless and as worthless, the only thing that becomes senseless and worthless is our worship. Until we are willing and able to seek reconciliation, then anything we do in offering to God is going to be rejected. And that's very serious. Remember, worship is one of the primary ways we reflect the image that God has given us out into the world and up into Him. And if we cannot do that, then we can't fulfill the purpose for which we've been created. And if that's our condition, then we have got to make things right by reconciling with our victim. The example of David perhaps makes the point that Jesus is making here about how reconciliation is more valued than worship. In the 51st Psalm, David will confess his sins to God in a very heartfelt way, and he acknowledges how the true sacrifices offered to God are not these burnt offerings, but rather a broken or a contrite heart. And that's what Jesus is trying to get us to realize in this part of the Sermon on the Mount. In conclusion today, the value that we give to our fellow man, the value that we give to each other, must be appraised entirely in light of the sacrifice of Jesus. In 1 Peter chapter 1, Peter describes how we weren't redeemed with silver and gold and corruptible things. Now, we usually don't think that silver and gold are corruptible. Silver and gold are very valuable to us. But Peter says you weren't redeemed with things like silver and gold. Rather, you were redeemed by the precious blood of God's Lamb. That's how Peter appraises the value of what has been done for us through the death of Jesus. That's how much Jesus cares and loves us. The value that is placed upon us by God is, in effect, priceless. Therefore, the cross should shape entirely how we view and appraise the value of each other. So if today you can look into your heart and see where you have mistreated someone, then go to them, apologize to them, seek reconciliation, work on restoring trust and love in that relationship together. And then you will be able to clearly reflect God's glory as part of his kingdom. I thank you for joining me today. I hope you'll come and tune in next time as we continue in our study of the Sermon on the Mount. Thank you and have a nice day.